industry plays in driving infrastructure investment. If you look at the social housing that's being built, if you look at the new super terminal that's being built at Manchester Airport, if you look at the savings provision that's being provided for people in retirement, this industry makes all of that possible. So we're keen to partner up to continue to work closely with government and with regulators to play our role in doing that. And John touched on the Chancellor's statement a few days ago. We thought that was a very welcome recognition of the need to address what will be a debt burden that a lot of SMEs will need to address. And again, the industry is keen to play its part in refinancing and recapitalising the companies that will be the growth companies that drive the recovery in the years ahead and drive the UK's prosperity post-Brexit. And one other thing I just want to touch on is that the Japan-UK FTA, I think, is a terrific example of what can be achieved as the UK moves forward with an independent trade and investment policy. And that all the indications are that we've gone way beyond and set a new gold standard for cooperation in financial and professional services, and that will help raise the bar for FTAs, for free trade agreements with other centres. I'm particularly excited by the work the Treasury has been doing and the industry alongside that with Switzerland, where there is every opportunity to develop something that is just as impressive as the Japanese deal that will drive growth on both sides. I think the final thing I'd add is that the industry is the UK's most successful exporter. Again, that isn't just a London story. Half of those exports come from outside the M25. And the role the UK has, both in terms of the public sector and the private sector, as a powerful voice for avoiding fragmentation of markets, fragmentation of regulation, the growth of protectionism and isolationism. I think that's a really important role that government, regulators and industry can play together in the years ahead that will help to drive prosperity, not just in the UK, but internationally.
Great, well, thank you, Miles. And now we move on to Tasnim.
Thanks a lot, Charlotte, for having me and Barclays be on this panel, and thank you also to the CityUK for sponsoring it as well. The reason we wanted to be part of this conversation is because supporting the economic recovery is what we're here to do here at Barclays. As you mentioned earlier, I'm the head of the UK Corporate Banking business here at Barclays. So I'm talking to UK corporates up and down the country about the challenges that they're facing and how they've been navigating through the crisis and what they need from us in order to support them better. We've absolutely strived to support our customers and clients throughout the crisis and have been stood behind all of the government lending schemes, which to date means we've facilitated approximately £24 billion of funding into the economy and supported over 290,000 businesses. And that's just us here at Barclays. That really is unprecedented, and that word unprecedented is really commonly used, particularly this year. But just to put that into context, and why I think it's definitely unprecedented, is that we at Barclays, if we look at the Bounce Back scheme, just in the first 12 weeks of launching Bounce Back, we did 3 years worth of lending. So that is, you can imagine the hard work that our teams had to put in to process all those loans, and they really worked tirelessly throughout, sometimes quite difficult personal circumstances that they were all facing individually as people. And I think it just reflects the scale of the crisis that we find ourselves in, and how everyone came together to support the economy, and people knew that the work that they were doing was absolutely helping to keep people in their jobs. In addition to the government schemes, there was also a broad range of other support measures that we also put in place, like payment holidays on personal loans and mortgages. We didn't only rely on government schemes and continue to provide our normal lending, commercial lending, in fairly significant volumes, which isn't really talked about, and which also talks to the fact that there were businesses out there that were quite resilient and had other opportunities that they were able to grab, which all in all kind of gives me a reason to be quite optimistic about the future. But as we know, the crisis is not over yet. There's uncertainty over a second wave of infections, as well as the UK's future relationship with Europe. And I think the combination of both these factors, not to mention any kind of spillover from the US elections, is creating some nervousness in the business community. And so it is a little bit of a nervous time for corporate Britain. But we're here to listen and working closely with businesses to help them work things through.
Well, thank you, Tasnim. And now Ben.
Right, well, thank you, Charlotte. And I'd also like to say it's great to have John in the chair during this very challenging time, because he's always taken my phone calls at bizarre times of the day when I was stressed about something, and he calmed me down. And no, but in all seriousness, he is somebody, as he's already described with his own experience, he really understands professional services, understands finance. And it's really, really good that he's been in the chair over these last few months in particular. I don't want to repeat what other people have said, so I'll try and say something a bit different. So in essence, and I say this as chair of the APPG on financial services and markets, but also as somebody who was a corporate lawyer at Freshfields and Simpson Thacher, and then I moved to working in strategy at HSBC. I think that the long-term competitiveness of the UK financial services sector is of critical importance. The Financial Services Act, I think it was 2012, when it set up the tripartite system, very much, or rather not set up that system, but established various things, in particular ring fencing. But there was a debate at that time, and maybe John can answer a question later because he was in Commons at that time, I was not, about whether competitiveness should be the primary aim of the FCA and of our regulators. And the decision was taken not to do that because at the time we were coming out of the financial crisis and everybody was quite rightly focused on making sure that banks became more capitalized and the system was structurally safer. I would like to argue that we do need to focus very much on competitiveness, not just the government, not just Parliament, but our regulators as well. And I think that something we should talk about is the nature of the relationship between Parliament, government, and the regulator, to see how going forward we can make sure that the efforts by the Treasury or ministers to try and make sure that our financial services sector keeps ahead of the curve, safe but also very competitive, isn't stymied by regulators. So I think that that's a really important point and question. I also think it is very important that that we make sure financial services is relevant to everybody. I'm mindful that this is Conservative Party conference. Most people who will attend or watch whatever we call it this year, the Conservative Party conference, do not live in London. They actually may not live in a big city, probably. They probably don't work in the industry. And a lot of them will probably think financial services is not something particularly to do with me outside, maybe a personal loan, a mortgage, an overdraft facility for my business. And it's about making sure that financial services is relevant to making sure people understand it's relevant to them. Miles mentioned that 2/3 of financial services jobs are outside the M25. That's true. He mentioned Edinburgh being a financial services centre. That's true. One of the things that I am trying to do, and I hope we'll do it when the financial services bill comes out that John was mentioning, is to really engage with as wide a group of members of Parliament as possible, so that they see this is not just something for the member for the City of London. It's something that's really relevant to them. Because if we can if the flip side is, if they don't think it's relevant to them, all the efforts that people put into making sure financial services does the right thing, is competitive, is safe, is leading, is in danger because people don't necessarily see the value it adds to their constituents and their area. And I know on speaking to lots of my colleagues that they don't necessarily feel that connection of financial services. So I think we do have a job to make sure that everybody recognises it's relevant to them. The last thing I'll say, Bearing in mind, we talked about post-COVID, post-Brexit, I wonder what next sort of big seismic event we'll have to add to that, is that it has actually never been a better time to start a company. If you look at the technological changes, you've got, you know, big data, blockchain, AI, all of these things happening at the same time. And venture capital is key to that. Lawyers are key to all that. Consultants are key to all that. Sensible accountants are key to all that. So actually, we are in a very fortunate position in this country because we have that ecosystem there. We're not having to build it, we're having to nurture it, support it, and grow it. And so we should be optimistic. But as I say, I do think that we do need to make sure that people know that financial services is relevant, professional services is relevant to them in the whole country, and that we can establish that connection, not just with MPs and politicians and things, but with the people as well.
Thank you, Ben. We've got some questions coming in. So I don't know if anyone wanted to respond to any elements that were drawn out in the initial takeaways, but I can go on to some of the questions. So Bruce asks, we are leaving the EU at the end of January 2021. Do you think all businesses from large to SMEs are ready for the UK leaving on January 2021? So perhaps we could go back to John to start with.
Rather him than any of us.
Well, I think the enduring uncertainty has been unfortunate, but we've done a massive amount to mitigate it. And last year, in the run-up to the election, I personally took through nearly 60 what we called statutory instruments, pieces of secondary legislation to ensure that we had a fully functioning regime in the UK, come what may. And that has given a massive amount of reassurance. And if you look at some of the predictions that some think tanks and observers of the city were saying 3 years ago in terms of jobs that were going to inevitably move out of the City of London, and what they're saying now, it just hasn't happened. And that doesn't make me complacent, but it makes me pleased with the fact that we took necessary measures. We've now got a new set of challenges. And so if I may just add a few comments in responding to Bim's helpful analysis of the opportunities. You know, this whole dynamic of the relationship between the regulators, government and Parliament is really, really important, how we get that right. And Bim's right to say that when the regime was last sort of fundamentally refreshed after the financial crisis, there was a reluctance to put a wholesale competitiveness driver for the regulator, principally because, as Bim also pointed out, the challenge was to actually gain systemic stability. Now, my view is that if we've got systemic stability in our financial services sector, then we've still got an obligation to look at our relative standing, which is a concept that the regulators very much, PRA and the FCA are very much open to how we can actually, where we can, innovate and create more opportunities. And it's not a binary situation. If you think about the work we've done over the last 5 years in terms of new banks, there's been over 20 new banks set up, which has been a great move by the regulators working with the Treasury and industry. But they're often at very different stages. And so how do you have capital requirements that differ for different size institutions that actually enable them to compete, to grow, and to actually address the competitiveness imperative? But obviously, I hope that we'll have a conclusion of the negotiations imminently with clarity about where we're going forward. But we haven't just sat back and waited for this. As Miles pointed out, we have had a fantastic outcome. The work colleagues in government, and Liz Truss in particular, has done with respect to the Japanese free trade deal. That sets the framework for handling data in ways that go beyond, way beyond where the EU have taken it. And the appetite from the Swiss on mutual recognition is, really phenomenal. We're in a situation where our mindset as a country to regulation is different. We look at outcomes-based approaches. We don't want to codify everything in formulae on the face of the bill. Thank goodness, because I don't fancy taking that through a committee stage in a few weeks' time. But it is important that that distinction is clear. And that does not mean that we're trying to race to the bottom, but it does mean that we've got a different mindset, which is about enabling the success of small and larger businesses to grow in an open international environment that we want to promote.
And Miles, did you want to add your?
Yeah, if I could, I think it's a really important question. And again, I think it's an example of industry, regulators and government working extremely closely together as we've prepared for this moment where we come out of the transitional period. And certainly the regulators were very forward thinking on this. They have to be. This is an important industry. You can't have a situation where you've got any risk of systemic or economic instability or disruption. And so we work very closely with them. The industry pretty much from day one has hoped for the best in terms of a deal, but prepared for the worst. And so as much as is possible, we have moved what we need to move. We've got the regulatory, the appropriate regulatory licenses in place, capital's been moved and so on. But I would just echo what John said. So the EY Brexit tracker, which is I think best in class when it comes to getting a sense of what the impact of Brexit has been, was released. The most recent one was released just this week, and it showed that 7,500 jobs had moved in financial services from the UK. Now, that's not an insignificant number, and we're not complacent. But to put it into context, it's a fraction of the 1.1 million that are in pure financial services in the UK. And it's also important to bear in mind that not all of those jobs that will move from the UK will go just to the European Union. I talked about COVID being an accelerator. Brexit in some ways is an accelerator. Companies are moving people to Asia, they're moving them to the US, but also you're seeing enormous investment in fintech here in the UK. So there's an ongoing sort of churn in these things. And I think it's important to maintain perspective on this. I think what we do need to watch is that a lot of assets have shifted. So about £1 trillion worth of assets, which is obviously a substantial part of anybody's money. But again, we're not complacent about this. The UK needs to be internationally competitive. It needs to be attractive to business, attractive to entrepreneurs, and attractive to institutions. And we will have the better opportunity to do that if there is close relationships and close cooperation and collaboration between the regulators, the industry, and the government. And one thing I would say about the European financial services regulatory process and legislative process is that it is actually very good at that technocratic element of consulting with the industry, of getting industry input. And certainly I don't get any sense from John and his Treasury colleagues that there's any desire to be any less consultative as the UK develops its own mechanism. And so I think there is an opportunity here for partnership as we develop what the industry looks like and the appropriate regulatory mechanisms that drive that international competitiveness. And we have the scope to have our own innovations, but also to learn from other centres who are setting the standard as we develop regulation for the financial services industry of the 21st century.
Cool. And Bim, what's your take on whether SMEs and large businesses are ready?
I think they are, because of the measures that John's already set out in terms of domestic rules. I think if there's an agreement, and I think we all hope that will be the case, and it looks more promising now than say it did, a few weeks or a few months ago, then I think it'll be fine. There'll be some disruption, but if there's anything I know about that industry, it's sucked up a huge amount of Britain's smartest people, and they adapt very well.
Great. And Tasnim, what have you found from your perspective?
So I think from a Barclays company perspective, we are very much ready for the transition period and feel really positive about the opportunities that the future holds with regards to trading agreements, both with the EU and the US. We're Brexit ready in terms of, we've set up Barclays Europe so that any clients that need to trade with Europe are going to be able to continue to do so. This, I should add that this has come at considerable cost to us, which is a very large organisation. We've been able to absorb those costs, but clearly some of the smaller clients would not have the ability to absorb the kind of costs that involves. But we are working with them and working through various scenarios with them, and the more kind of certainty we can provide to businesses about what the future relationship will look like, will just give them time to adapt, which I think is very, very important, so that they can put in the systems and the processes that they need to in order to, I think businesses can generally deal with anything as long as they've got the time to kind of make the changes that are required. So I think we're kind of optimistic about the future, but clearly the more certainty we can give businesses, the better.
Okay, so Charlie Wooding has asked, what guidance would you provide to shareholders and what strategies will be put in place to safeguard confidence of the British financial markets in general? Would you like to come back to that, Tasneem? Shall I read that out again?
Yes, please.
So what guidance would you provide to shareholders and what strategies will be put in place to safeguard the confidence of the British financial markets in general?
So I think in terms of providing confidence to the financial markets, confidence is probably the secret sauce, I'm going to say, to everything, to wooing investors, to want to invest in business, to want to invest in infrastructure projects, because there's certainty of kind of outcomes, and for people to feel that they're getting a return on the investments that they're making. And so I think in terms of building that kind of confidence in investors, I think it's very, very key. And as a bank, we always look for kind of to avoid kind of cliff edge scenarios as much as possible, and to provide that kind of transition period, particularly through this crisis, so that companies have the time to transition, and that they're not faced with kind of a cliff edge that they need to then work themselves out of. And so building that kind of confidence and making people kind of feel as if it's okay to invest, because there is going to be a bit of a safety net, I think, is kind of key.
What about you?
If I could just come in on that one, and I'd completely agree with what Tasneem has said. Although I'd say, speaking personally, certainly don't take anything I'm about to say as any kind of advice about your shareholdings, and the value of your investment can go down as well as up. But what I would say is, I think Tasneem is absolutely right. Confidence is critical here, and I think this is about underpinnings, fundamental underpinnings. And what attracts people to the UK to list their businesses, to do business here, to invest here, is a number of things. One of which is a gold standard level of regulation and supervision. So we don't always see eye to eye with our regulators and supervisors in the industry, but I don't think there's any question that we are incredibly fortunate to have amongst the world's best regulators here in the UK. And they are just terrific public servants who are genuinely motivated to do the best job that they can. And they are enormously innovative, and I don't think we give them credit for that sufficiently. So the sandbox, the regulatory sandbox, which was the first of its kind anywhere in the world that would allow fintechs the opportunity to experiment, in effect, in terms of their regulation and supervision, which has been copied everywhere, pretty much everywhere in the world, was something that came from the British regulators. So I think it's really important that we continue to have that regulatory and supervisory expertise, and that is matched by what we see with the work being done by the terrific officials and teams that are in Treasury and elsewhere in government. So I think that's a fundamental underpinning. I think the rule of law, the fact that what we have here in the UK is an enormously successful international dispute and arbitration centre that attracts people from all over the world. Half of all the commercial disputes that take place under English law, and I think that's both a soft power opportunity. It's something that I think we need to guard really, really carefully, and it attracts people to the UK to do business, because unlike with some other jurisdictions, David Cameron always used to say when he was talking to potential international investors, the beauty of investing in the UK, you can come here and you can sue me, and actually you've got a very good chance of winning. And so that is a huge reassurance for international investors. So I think being able to show that we are, as I talked about earlier, that we're leaning into the changes that are coming, that we're seizing the accelerations that are being generated by COVID, by Brexit, by the broader international situation and economic situation that we find ourselves in, and that we're maintaining high standards here in the UK, I think is going to be absolutely important to addressing the point that Charlie rightly raises.
Brilliant. So we've got a question on a bit of a different topic. So should the relative popularity of socialism, asked Ben Muldoon, among younger voters worry us about the future of free enterprise? So Ben, do you want to answer this?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the relative popularity of socialism. I'm not sure I accept the premise. What I do accept is that there is a big political divide between the young and old. You see it in voting patterns, you see it in benefits to work, the difference between benefits to working age people and retirees. You see it in low interest rates, structurally low for a very long time. And I'm sure John hopes, because otherwise it gives him a panic, that they stay low for as long as he's in post. But, you know, very low interest rates for a very long time benefit, they benefit older workers rather than younger ones. You see the growth of QE across the whole world, driven by the Fed, but obviously supported by Bank of England, Bank of Japan, the ECB, which has meant that asset holders do very well. And you look at the economy cratering because of COVID, and yet stock markets are sort of okay. And when you look at all of that, I am worried. I'm worried that young people look at the system and rationally look at it and think, this isn't working at all. I'm not quite sure whether their critique of it equals socialism. You know, because some people might say that, you know, because of you see the financial crisis in 2010, or rather 2007-8, and what we had to do then with the banks. You see what's happened with COVID, what the government, and not just this government, but across the world, have had to do in relation to that. I think that sort of the word in and of itself, I don't think is what younger people want, but I do think that at some point, unless we can try and balance out how the system works between the older and the younger, and I make that start point very deliberately, then I do think something, maybe if not socialism, something quite radical will come, and it will win, because ultimately in a democracy, when people fundamentally think something's wrong, they take action in the ballot box. So I say that as a challenge to myself and to my colleagues in particular, because I think it is a real potential danger.
What do you think, John?
I think Ben's expressed it quite well. I think there are, you know, there's clearly a polarization of attitudes in society. There's intergenerational divergence. But I think we've got to get into the argument and move away from slogans. Actually, we have a vibrant economy and we have tax revenues to invest in our public services, you know, when we create the conditions for growth. And that means entrepreneurs continuing to want to invest and to employ people in this country. Now, I think that there are a number of areas in professional and financial services, such as the green finance agenda, such as fintech, and then the facilitation of levelling up through the way that we can incentivize investment across the United Kingdom, have a talk directly to the concerns of the next generation, to be able to access financial services more easily, to be able to make comparisons, to be able to verify where your auto-enroll pension is going and how the assets are being invested and how those companies are being addressing the net zero challenge. You know, absolutely on the money in terms of dealing with the challenges of the next generation. So I think it's incumbent upon us in government and in Parliament to actually, tell the next generation of what radical steps we're taking, because our agenda on the green agenda is not a timid one. It's a bold one, but it's not going to be achieved by just keep waving placards about. It means actually a deliberate attempt to look at what the inhibitors are, look at where regulations have got to move, look at what interventions we need to make to drive our economy in a cleaner and greener direction. But it's got to be also within the context, as Ben was alluding to, of sensible management of the economy. We've had to spend a lot of money, a lot of borrowing in order to try and preserve as much of the economy as we can. But also we need to ensure that we get back to a situation of sound public finances, because in the end, the markets rely on a fundamental integrity in terms of the medium-term financial position of the nation's finances. And that's going to need some bold interventions that will actually have to look creatively at what we do differently on the spending. There's always there's three elements. There's how much we spend, how much we borrow, and how much we tax. And we're going to have to look at that very, very carefully to get that right for the next generation. But I favour engaging with young people, moving beyond the slogans and actually looking at the real choices that exist for us as a country. And if we do that, then I'm more optimistic about removing some of the unpleasantness in the polarization of politics that we've seen over the last 5 years.
Tasnim or Miles, any of you, do you like to come back on any of the points?
I'm going to strictly stay in my lane on the future of socialism, and I see Bim's looking to come in and may well have something to add. But I just want to pick up on something that both Bim and John have talked about, which I think is really important to faith in politics and institutions generally, which is that we've got to create opportunities for young people. And we are in a massively changing, very febrile environment when it comes to the future of the economy. People having to reskill, they're having to pick up new skills. I find it amazing, for instance, that if you look at STEM subjects here in the UK, the proportion of graduates with the highest level of unemployment after leaving university in a STEM subject are computer science graduates. So 6 months after leaving university, computer science graduates have the highest level of unemployment. And given the demand for computer science skills, I find that absolutely astonishing. And the fact also that we should be looking at what we can do in terms of technical education and how we can reach into communities, and our industry's been doing a lot on this, how we can reach into communities who might look at white collar jobs and think that that's not for them, and it's not for people from their backgrounds. When you look at the social mobility commissions, Social Mobility Foundation's analysis of the 50 companies that are most successful in terms of social mobility, 27 of those 50 are in financial and related professional services. So we've done a lot in our industry. We're growing the ecosystems of talent, the clusters of talent that exist in places outside the major cities. But for my view, my purely personal view, is it's that will help to drive faith in institutions and people's ability to continue to better themselves and do well for themselves. So it's creating jobs, it's creating high-skilled jobs, and it's creating an environment that reaches into communities that are hard to reach in terms of giving people opportunities that historically they and their families might not have expected.
Great, and does this play into the sector's support of the levelling up agenda? Because you talked about opportunities beyond the M25. Could you elaborate a bit more about how?
Sure, and I think what's really exciting is you look at clusters in places like Birmingham, which has become a huge centre for banks and others, Edinburgh, which is a massive centre for fund management, Manchester, which is the largest legal services centre outside London in England and Wales, looking at English and Welsh law. And there's a huge amount the industry is doing, reaching into communities, trying to bring people into the industry who wouldn't otherwise, as I said earlier, have thought of it. And also the working with the university. So one of the reasons that we're seeing these growths in employment in cities such as Manchester and Birmingham and Leeds and elsewhere is because graduates, and it's a fascinating shift. 25 years ago, when you left university, typically you went to London and you tried to get a job in London. And actually, there's a fascinating shift taking place that graduates are now staying at the university that they've graduated from much, much more, or they are going back to their hometowns. And spending time in London is something that you might do almost as a sort of finishing school. You use it as a career accelerator for 5 years, and then you go back home or to your university town. So we're seeing a spread of talent and these reservoirs of skills much more widely across the UK. I think that the remote working revolution, which we are going through at the moment, which has been, again, an issue that's been accelerated by the COVID crisis, may well see that being deepened and broadened in terms of a trend. My sense is we're not about to snap back to 5 days a week in the office, but I'm skeptical about some of the more excitable people who seem to think that we're going to live in the next best thing to the Matrix and all live at home. I suspect it'll be a bit more of a hybrid model. And I think that offers huge opportunities, not just for the big cities, but some of the towns that have been left behind over the last 20 or 30 years. And so I think there's a huge degree of potential excitement here, huge degree of opportunity. And this industry, just because of the way that it operates and its track record in this sort of area, I think will be at the forefront, not just of achieving this for itself, but working with other parts of the economy as an enabler for this.
Okay, and on that note, talking about working from home, because the government obviously had a very big effort to get city workers back. Tasnim, how have you found the shift to this new format at Barclays? How's that going down?
So it's actually been an amazing experience, really, where I think it was March 23rd, we literally went from having almost everybody in the office to almost nobody in the office, like literally at a flick of a switch in a very short period of time. And I think, all of us were very impressed with how quickly we were able to get 70,000 employees all around the world established, working from home very productively. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that was exactly sort of at the height of the crisis in terms of some of the schemes that were being launched and all the work that was really mounting up for us in order to kind of ensure that we were funding clients quickly and not just approving stuff internally, but actually getting the money into their accounts quickly, and to manage through all of that in a working from home environment. Took a lot of heavy lifting for our people, but the technology was really fabulous in terms of how it has been helping us, and all the investments we've been making in technology over many years, of course, not just this year, has sort of enabled that we had kind of a resilient system to be able to kind of work through all of that. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of comments that Miles made about young people and skills, because I think young people, they're the future, and we have to make sure that they have the right skills so that they can face work, whatever format that it is, whether it's in a working from home environment or in an office environment, or in a more operational environment. And so some of the things that we've been working on here is around contributing to life skills, and we're participating in the life skills program. There's a Connect Work program which we've really been ramping up and dialing up our focus on, and we're really leveraging our regional networks through that program in particular, which helps to support people who normally face barriers to getting into work. One of the things I'm really pleased to be able to say is that in the summer of this year, we welcomed all the normal apprenticeships that we have, even in the working from home environment, as well as all our global summer internships. That's over 1,000 people that we took in to our programs, and were able to kind of provide the training experience. It does take a little bit of creativity and hard work, I would say, to make working from home work. And you know, as I say to some of my leaders, it actually requires more from leaders in terms of the ways in which you communicate, the ways in which you involve people, the coaching, the counselling. You know, it is a different style of working, but I think that in itself is helping us all to improve and helping us to build kind of really sort of adaptable, flexible skills for the future of work. Because I think Miles said it already, what we've experienced is quite outstanding in terms of we can make it work. And you know, although there is an absolute role for the office, it's going to be a different role going forward. The role of the office is going to be different in the future. And certainly, if I think about myself, I can't see I'm going to be 5 days in the office anymore. You know, I will definitely be going to the office, and I'm really looking forward to going back to the office. But it will be a mixture of working from home and office-based work. And I think the other thing just to add is that there were roles at Barclays where we had just assumed that those could not be done working from home. And I think we've proven to ourselves that the vast majority of roles actually can work from home. And I think in kind of supporting some of our colleagues in giving them lots of dynamic working opportunities and to be able to kind of, you know, have good work-life balance, I think it's been a really good experience, I think, for us.
Okay, and what do you think of the working from home revolution? Have you enjoyed it as an MP?
Parliament is a bit different from lots of workplaces insofar as so much of what you do in politics is personal. You know, if you, at the end of the day, if someone was to say to a politician, you know, what did you do today? The answer is actually, I've talked to a lot of my colleagues. I know that sounds a bit odd, or made a speech that nobody listened to or whatever, but actually, so much of what you do is personal interaction. But, and I go back to me being in the city, so I am not sure that we have all got this right. And what I mean is, I think there is definitely a place for working from home. I think everybody knows that. Frankly, there was before, and actually there was a gradual, you know, people working from home 1 or 2 days a week. I think the danger, what I see quite a lot of, are senior people in white collar professions of all types who, and often mid-level people, but people who've got kids, you know, their lifestyle is different. They don't necessarily live in London. If they work in London, their view is, well, working from home works fine. I don't have to take that plane to Mumbai because I can speak to the person working, you know, through Zoom. I can deal with my office. My team runs. They know me. I know them. I meet them once or twice a week. And what's wrong with that? And I'd have to pay for that expensive season ticket from Harpenden or wherever. Now, actually, the people who lose out are the young people. I mean, when I was a trainee corporate lawyer, pretty hopeless. And the only way I got through it was because I watched really carefully people who are a bit more senior than me physically mark up documents. I physically watched them do it. I saw how that process worked. I saw them work with clients. And actually, if you're sitting at home, my little sister has just started at a law firm as a trainee. And actually listen to her. She's been in the office sort of, I think she's been in once or twice since she started in August. You know, so I mean, look, she'll work very hard, and I'm sure they're doing the best they can. But, you know, I worry about this for the younger people. I worry about it for the people who you need to see and touch and understand how something works, the dynamics of anything technical, whether it be law, accounting, finance. And of course, Tasnim, you know, knows that. And of course, Barclays will be trying to work that through all the way from their entry level to their, so it's not a Barclays specific point. I'm making the point very broadly. But I do think we need to worry about a lot of senior people who already have made their contacts. They've got their friends. Frankly, most of the clients, they don't want to see them anyway. And this is actually a perfect excuse not to. Younger people are the people that need to go, and they need to physically be present. So I just hope we don't correct on this one.
And Sean, what are your thoughts on working from home and the government's efforts to get people back?
Well, we need to continue to work to get back to normal as quickly as possible. And I'm privileged to be able to speak to lots of senior leaders in different firms across professional services. And what I saw is two reactions. One, as Tasnim said, the issue of being able to operationalize 98, 99% working from home very quickly was a great success with respect to the mechanics of it, and with respect to the putting some of those support functions which were instrumental in delivering some of the bounce back loans, the mortgage holidays, etc., and will continue to be really, really important. But I'm highly skeptical that this can be an enduring reality for a lot of aspects of professional services and financial services and the economy as a whole. Business is based on relationships, and relationships, any relationship that's worth having, needs human contact. And you need to have those corridor conversations. And, I've been in the Treasury every day for several weeks, and I came up to Parliament every day, as much as I was allowed to, because I wanted to meet people in a little half hour outside of Zoom calls. I wanted to talk to colleagues. I did want to have BIM bending my ear, because actually then I can be informed about the interventions I've got to make. And the same is true for the city and for business generally. And so, yes, we've got to be cautious. We've got to take the advice, and it's obviously complex with huge variegated position around the country, which is incredibly challenging to communicate, frankly. But what we have got to focus on is, how do we drive businesses forward? We drive it through collaborative dialogue in person and not on Zoom calls. So yes, there'll be a digital transformation agenda that will rightly improve the way many functions happen. But I'm with Miles and I'm with BIM, and I think Tasnim as well. I think we've got a consensus that this only goes so far. And so what I want to do is say, well, what can we do to actually facilitate the best possible bounce back to a vibrant, dynamic economy where people meet each other, which is obviously good for the jobs associated with the physical place of the city and other towns and other cities across the country. Because we need to get back to normal as quickly as possible. And that's not just about the public finances; it's about the mindset that we need to have as entrepreneurs, as a nation.
Okay, and then the next question I've got from Matthew Conway. In setting out its thinking on the future regulatory framework for financial services, will the government address not just how to improve the activity of regulation, but also its vision for the future of the sector in a post-Brexit, post-COVID world?
Yes, I don't want to sort of repeat too much that I've said before, but we were at stage 2 of the regulatory review process, and the industry wanted us to sort of amalgamate and list all the initiatives, of which there are well over 120, I think, across all the regulators. So there'd be some visibility. I hope that will drive a conversation about prioritisation and consolidation of interventions. But the key issue we've now got to grapple with for the next session is to look at this relationship between regulators, government, and Parliament. And hitherto we've got a world-renowned platform in terms of the Financial Services and Markets Act of 2000, which focused and instinctively relied on outcomes, and that's been, to some sense of, we've migrated away from that through the EU membership, and which did. And of course, we had dialogue through the institutions of the EU, and we were the voice of sense in many areas, and we came out with some good outcomes, but not always the best outcomes, and that has a degree of frustration. What we will now need to think about is how Parliament and Treasury can lead a clear agenda, but then we will have to delegate, because a lot of this is technical standards. And I know, as obviously as backbench MP for several years, I wouldn't have been informed enough, even with a background in professional services, to actually change those regulations on the floor of the House. But what we need is a scrutiny function that can actually say, how have the regulators delivered on the mandate of Parliament? We've said we want a competitive environment that makes the best of Solvency II, for example. What's actually happened consequential of that? So it's going to be a new enhanced role, I think, for Parliament, and the Treasury Select Committee will need to think about that. And I've met with Mel Stride and set out the broad parameters of the conversation that we need to have. It will be an iterative discussion. There's no prescription from the government. We hope to listen very carefully to what industry has to say. But I think we need to not see this as a competing, industry, government, and regulators. It needs to be an efficient dialogue that leads to quick outcomes that address the competitiveness driver that Bim was talking about, and that gives us the best way to, we have an excellent reputation for our regulators. And, our regulators do drive innovation that others copy. And I want that to continue to be the way forward. But it is a dynamic environment. Things are changing all the time. If you think about the crypto assets and blockchain, these are evolving, whole ways of working that, regulators and government and, Parliament needs to think about alongside industry. So, I'm very, very focused on making sure we get this right. But to get it right, government's got to listen, and we've got to iterate through some options to get to the right legislative framework to move this to conclusion. We need to do that quickly, and we'll do that in the early part of next year.
Okay, and then we've got one from Nacho Moraes. Smaller financial companies, and this is more for industry, Tasnim and Miles, smaller financial companies which work cross-border have the most to lose from the loss of the EU passport. Needless to say, no deal, as they do not have the resources to establish branches abroad. Do you expect consolidation in the sector after January? Shall I read that again? Or?
No, I'm happy to take a first stab at that. So I think this goes to the challenge about making sure that we've got some kind of deal or the best possible relationship between the UK and the EU as we leave the transition period. And it might be that that's something that we will have to rebuild and build upon over time between the UK and the EU. A lot of it is also going to depend, it's not solely in the gift of the UK. A lot of this is going to depend on the rules that the EU puts in place in terms of access to its market from other countries. And I think something that hasn't always had a huge degree of attention is that that's a very live debate in the European Union. The future of equivalence is something that is very much under discussion between various European member states. Absolutely, we've argued from the start of this that it is in everybody's best interests on either sides of the channel for the industry, for customers, for citizens, for there to be a minimum amount of friction between the UK and the EU. And we hope that that is where we will end up, and industry wants to play a positive role in that. I would just very briefly add to something that John just said in the answer to the previous question, and I think he set out very well the challenge, and we're very much looking forward to continuing to work with him and his colleagues on that. I totally endorse the view, and I'm sure parliamentarians would be glad to hear this, that there's no need to create a British version of the Econ Committee, which looks after this in the European Parliament, which delves into detail in a way that I just don't think makes sense in the British parliamentary system. But what I do think will be important as we go forward is that we take advantage of the fact that we're not one of 28 member states anymore having to negotiate around the future of financial services regulation and professional services regulation. That actually, because it's hopefully a more compact, streamlined decision-making process, the UK's advantage will be that you'll be able to act, hopefully, in concert, in collaboration, in a positive cooperation between industry, regulators and government. But I think the critical thing is that there's speed and flexibility in the way that regulation is built, so that it's consultative, but that there is this ability for us to take advantage of the fact that we should be able to have streamlined, efficient decision-making processes that allow us to innovate more quickly than a larger market would. And ultimately, that's the trade-off in trade and in regulation. It's either being fast and nimble for a smaller market, or it is the advantages that come with being a huge market, such as the United States or China or the EU, but you move much more slowly.
Cool. Did you want to come back to that, John?
I don't think I've got much to add, really. I'll just be repeating what Miles has said. So I'll let Bim come in. He's always got something to say.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. So I think I agree with Miles that there isn't necessarily a need to replicate the slightly bizarre functions they have the European Parliament over this. However, and this is something I'm sure I'll talk to John about, over the coming weeks and months once this comes forward. So as the APPG on financial services and markets, working closely with UK Finance, we put out a consultation on this very question of Parliament's role post-Brexit and how we deal with financial services regulation. I think there is a case to not just enhance the scrutiny function, as John rightly says, but also to make sure that it's not just the Treasury Select Committee. Because I think what you have is you've got Treasury, which has to deal with such a broad, set of things. I think there is a case either for a subcommittee or a separate committee to very much focus on financial services. And I think we need, Parliament needs to work out whether that's a subcommittee of the Treasury or done more separately. There are members of the House of Lords with huge experience in this area as well, who, is there a way we can bring them in as well? And that may also sort of party politicize it as well. So we don't end up in party line votes on very technical issues. I just think that's something we should consider as well going forward.
Great. So the next, we've got quite a lot of questions actually. So the next question we've got is Nathan David Webb. And for Tasman, do you think simplification of the finance and tax legislation for companies and sole traders will help reform the finance sector's role in a post-COVID world?
I think the way I would answer that, Charlotte, is any simplification is always going to be welcome for businesses, right? Because the more complex we make it, the more costs that businesses ultimately suffer in trying to work through and work out how they should be complying with kind of requirements. And so, any form of simplification, I think, will help businesses, make it easier for them, but also help them to kind of save costs and make it easier for them to comply.
Okay, and we've also got quite a good question about how would you best advise young people looking to get into a finance career? What are your tips?
Well, one of the things I'd just observe on that is that we have taken forward with the industry, and Mark Hoban is chairing was a commission, now it's a board looking at financial services skills and how we actually create new pathways, perhaps at 18, or actually have specialisms at universities where people can, identify an aspiration early on to be able to get into financial services. And again, that's not just in London, that's about in Leeds, Southampton, or Birmingham or Edinburgh or wherever it might be, and actually trying to demystify the notion that actually working in the city means that you have to be, have to look like me and wear red braces. I mean, that's not the way it should be. And we need to challenge that and actually find better pathways. And it was interesting. I was talking to a constituent here in Salisbury, or I was talking to some friends of his last night. And, he had a really tough education, but had a sort of found a vocation into financial services, been a very successful financial planner. And, that came from, actually some intervention and mentoring that actually led to a pathway that wasn't through, university. We need to be better at helping people, young people, get into that pathway and normalising it outside of London as well, and the traditional pathway that perhaps probably Bim and I went through.
Okay. What do you think, Miles?
So I'd agree with what John said, and the work that Mark Hoban is leading on the Financial Services Skills Commission, I think, is really important on this. And one of the things that has shown, some of the feedback that has come up with, is the importance of mentoring. And I know that companies such as Barclays and my former employer Prudential do a lot on this. So there's some fascinating work that's been done on this, which goes to show that typically kids believe that the most realistic ambition they can have is the best job that a parent or relative of somebody in their group of friends has got. So if your best friend's uncle is the store manager, assistant store manager at the local Tesco, and that's the best job that you're aware of in your network of friends, that's what you consider sort of almost subconsciously as your most realistic target. And it's one of the reasons why you've got the terrific towers of Canary Wharf, and lots of kids, and we do work with a charity based in Tower Hamlets, lots of kids in Tower Hamlets who look at those towers and don't even consider for a moment that they could get a job there, despite the fact they are living almost cheek by jowl. So I think it's incumbent on industry, it's incumbent on schools, it's incumbent on them to work more closely together to create those opportunities, to demystify, as John puts, demystify financial and professional services. And that's the right thing to do morally. And it's also, and this is for me one of the most important elements of it, because it's not just the right thing morally, it's the right thing for the industry economically, because you are losing out on a vast pool of talent who will just go off and do well elsewhere. You know, there's a lot of kids for whom, you know, they might not be academically targeted. My old company did a lot of time working with schools, identifying kids who might not get the best GCSEs, but actually probably are going to be great working with customers or great working in a finance function. So it's working a little bit harder to do better, not going for the easy and obvious solutions. Another one of the large companies we work with, I was talking to them a little while ago, they were really proud of their intake. Recent intake. It was 35% black and minority ethnic, 52% female. Much as you can measure these things, it was diverse in terms of sexuality. And then when they opened their mouths, they all spoke with the same accent. So all they've done is actually recruit a very diverse group of fee-paying school kids who've gone to Russell Group universities. And so you're missing out on cognitive experience and diversity and experiential diversity. So I think there's a huge degree that we can do here. And I think it would be, as I say, in the best interest of the country and the best interest of the industry and the best interest of the people that we bring in. But I see that Bim wants to come in as well.
So I'm going to pose a question just because it's fun. And, you know, Charlotte may want to ask another one. And I'm going to ask Tasnim a question because obviously, you're very senior at one of the biggest banks in Europe or the world. You've seen waves of people over the last 20, 25 years. And you would have, when you were starting in the industry, have seen people who are in your position now who did not go to university. They probably started out, a lot of them would have started out at 18. They may well have found their way through sort of accountancy, then maybe working into banking. It was a less specialized world, the one that we used to be in. And my question to you, and I accept everything John and Miles have said, and I don't want to sort of repeat it, but my question to you is, when you look at how you do your recruitment, you speak to your senior HR people, do you fundamentally think that now you get better people than you did 20, 25, 30 years ago when things were more porous, they were less specialized, they're a bit more random to some degree?
So the way I'm going to answer that is that so I spend actually quite a bit of my time in recruitment, in trying to identify kind of the best talent that is available, in developing people as well. By the way, I should say that I chair the Gender Council here within the corporate bank at Barclays, which we just established earlier this year. And we've established 4 pillars under that, and one of them is, you know, how to attract more women into the profession. And what I would say, sort of broadly, and this is, you know, whether I'm mentoring people or whether I'm, you know, speaking at any kind of event, is that you actually don't need any particular degree for most jobs, particularly in banking, right? For the vast majority of jobs, you don't, you know, it's not like you need a special finance degree or an economics degree. You know, those kind of things will probably help a bit, but that's not not kind of the only requirement. And there's somebody who didn't do a finance degree herself, and also you know, I'm the mother of a daughter who has just gone into banking, and who also didn't do any kind of finance degree herself. I think it's
what was your degree, Tasnim?
My degree was in computer science.
Oh, very cool. That must be so handy now. I mean, yeah.
I don't know whether it was a very lucky choice to come out of university in the 90s with a computer science degree, I can tell you. But yeah, I definitely didn't want to go into kind of computer science kind of jobs, so I sort of flipped into finance. And initially started out as being or Mars, can't remember who mentioned, down an accounting track to begin with. So I think, you know, there are, and the other thing I think I would point out is that most financial services jobs, it's not just one job, right? There are lots and lots of different jobs, even within a bank. So, you know, we have jobs available on the trading floor, we have jobs available in banking. There's an enormous HR department, there's an enormous IT department, there's an enormous operations department. And in fact, I would say the vast majority of jobs available in a bank are non-banking jobs, like non-banker jobs. And I think that's sometimes the light that we try to shine when people are aspiring to get into financial services, that it's not just you go away, you do an MBA at, you know, a big Ivy League or big university in the UK, and then, you know, end up as an investment banker. That's not the only job available within a bank. There are lots and lots of other jobs that are available that you can kind of get into. And I think where we found success at Barclays is actually on the apprenticeship program, where we are taking people at, you know, very early stage who've not gone to university. And we can take them in quite large numbers. We put them on a 2-year program, and the vast majority of them get placed into a permanent job. You know, we sometimes, I think, ignore those kind of things that are really, you know, ending up with permanent employment. But you need that kind of bridge almost to be given to young people, so that they don't view sort of either you go to university and you get a job in financial services at the end of it, or, you know, there's no other option. You know, it has to be a university track. But I think, you know, the types of jobs available within financial services are vast. I think we do need to kind of shine the light onto those. And, you know, one of the things when I'm recruiting people, Ben, maybe to answer your question a little bit more directly, I think the complexity of the job has changed. That's one of the things I've noticed in my 25-year career, in that the type of banking that we do now, it is more complex. There are, you know, the products are more complex. The regulation around all the products is far more complex. And you know, before you'd kind of take a deposit, give a loan, that was kind of it. You know, now there's a lot more of the kind of financial instruments out there that, so I think there is a kind of a lift up in skills that you know, our people have had to go through. And so when we recruit, we kind of look for that. But you know, I don't believe any of it's rocket science. I think, as you were saying earlier, that all these things can be learned. And you know, we work very closely with whether it's apprenticeships or people that are coming on our graduate programs, to, you know, give them the support and the coaching and the training to kind of prepare themselves for this.
Oh, that's really interesting. Does anyone else have any thoughts about about entries into finance? We're coming to the end. I mean, I'd love to stay chatting. It's been fascinating. I'd love to stay chatting for ages, but has anyone got any takeaway points they'd like to depart with?
Well, I'd just like to say, you know, I think it's been a useful discussion. I think that, you know, we are in a challenging time, but the industry's in, you know, proven itself to be up to the challenge of dealing with the situation we're in. There's a lot more work to be done. It will evolve, but I think we need to have continuing close relationship between industry, regulators and government to actually get through this significant transition, both out of the COVID challenge, but through the end of the transition period. And there are great opportunities ahead, and we've got an enormous strength in the UK, and I'm excited about the work that we've got ahead of ourselves to make sure we deliver on the high expectations that I think we've discussed during this conversation.
Great. And Miles?
I'd just like to thank all the panelists, and I'd just like to particularly say thank you to John and Bim for all the work they've been doing in very pressured times within government and parliament. It's hugely appreciated by industry, and I'm sure by constituents and citizens generally. But I think this has been a terrific, a really interesting discussion. Thanks very much to ConHome for making it possible.
Well, we'd like to thank the panelists. It's been a fascinating chat. I'd like to thank the audience. I'd like to thank our partner, CityUK, for making this happen. Thank you, John, Miles, Tasmin, Bim. If you'd like to watch this event again or share it with friends, it will be on ConservativeHome's YouTube channel shortly. We hope you'll join us for our next event, which is in partnership with the Port of Dover, starting at 5 p.m, in which Henry Hill, our assistant editor at ConHome, will be speaking to Robert Courts, the Minister for Maritime, about how to ensure UK trade resilience. So we do hope you'll join. But in the meantime, thanks everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.